I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. On this edition of the program, we'll be hearing from philosopher Christian Miller about his book, The Honesty Crisis, Preserving Our Most Treasured Virtue in an Increasingly Dishonest World. We're going to be talking about what it means to be honest and why you should be honest. And I'm going to be asking a few devil's advocate questions as well, so I think you'll find this conversation rather interesting and informative. Before we get to that, however, though, I need to remind you that this show is almost entirely listener-funded, with the exception of my one sponsor, Mike Swanson of WallStreetWindow.com. So if you can, please support me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. And also, if you can, please support my sponsor, Mike Swanson of WallStreetWindow.com, by signing up for his free financial and trading newsletter at WallStreetWindow.com. It's a great financial and trading newsletter. I've had listeners make a return on investment thanks to Mike's trading tips, so check it out one more time. Head on over to WallStreetWindow.com. And with that being said, let's get to the conversation with Christian Miller. Welcome to Parallax Views, a guest that I'm very, very happy to be speaking with. Christian B. Miller is a philosopher and the author of The Honesty Crisis. And we're going to be getting into the virtue of honesty and what it means in our moment today, where there's a lot of confusion and distrust and fear of fake news, of lying. You know, is it, as the title puts, a crisis in our society? We'll be discussing that on this edition of the program. How are you doing, Christian Miller?
I'm doing great. I'm really honored to be on your show and look forward to our conversation. And thanks for engaging with these ideas.
So I guess the first issue I want to cover is the title, The Honesty Crisis. What is the honesty crisis? And I ask this because I know that you may have wanted to have a different title for it. You may have wanted to call it The Honesty Crises.
Yeah, right. That's right. Very good. Crisis is a strong word, I admit, and it maybe is meant to be attention grabbing and bold, but I don't think it's completely dishonest of me to use that word. So the idea of the honesty crisis, and let's just talk about an honesty crisis in general, and then why I might have wanted to change the title. An honesty crisis happens when dishonesty becomes more tempting than it was before, more incentivized, more appealing, and at the same time, there is greater freedom to be dishonest. It's harder to detect. It's harder to catch people in their dishonesty. Easier to get away with. So you have a bad combination of more appealing to be dishonest and harder to catch people being dishonest. When you have those two together, you have an honesty crisis. Now, why I might wanted to have changed the title is that in the course of the book, I have 6 case studies, 6 different honesty crises that I look at. And so there is no one honesty crisis in society. I think it's showing up in different ways in different areas of the society. Just to mention, we can get into them later if you like, but just to mention some examples of what they are, everything from deep fakes to AI student cheating to online infidelity, to politics and misinformation and fake news, sermon plagiarism in the religious case, celebrity, influencer culture, and dishonesty. These kinds of areas of society, they're clearly different. But in each of them, I'm seeing what I'm calling this honesty crisis pop up. And so honesty is under attack. It's eroding, and I'm worried about it. And that's why I wrote the book.
I know this is a question that my listeners will think is really basic, but it's more complicated than that. I think we have to ask the question of what do we even mean by honesty? Because people will say, oh, it's just when you tell the truth. That's
Right.
honesty. But even truth itself as a term, that has many different meanings. So let's get into what we mean by honesty. What do we mean by truth? Because you have to dissect these terms. And I think this is why we need philosophers, because a lot of people don't consider it's more complicated than we like to think.
Good. I'm glad we're good for something. Keep us around. For nothing else than for that. Yeah, I mean, I'm a philosopher. I have to start that way. I have to be clear about what I'm talking about. I think every philosopher should start that way. Otherwise, we're just talking past each other. We don't even know if we're talking about the very same thing. So honesty can be used in a variety of ways. I could talk about a one-off honest behavior, like I tell you the truth right now. That's an honest thing for me to do. But I'm interested in something deeper. I'm more foundational. Honesty, the virtue, as part of someone's character. So an honest person has a kind of character that leads them to behave in certain ways and also to feel certain things. So it's an outward behavioral side to it and an inward motivational side to it. And let me expand on that. And then I'll let you follow up about truth if you want to pursue after we kind of clarified honesty. On the outward side, behaviorally, what would you expect of an honest person? Well, the first things first. Absolutely, you expect them to tell the truth. That's where our mind goes to. That's where our cultural beacons of honesty are kind of centered around truth telling. But I think it would be a mistake to stop there, because here are some other things that honesty prevents. Yes, it prevents lying. It prevents misleading. It prevents stealing. It prevents cheating, promise breaking, BSing, fraud, self-deception, hypocrisy, and on down the list. Many different behaviors, not collapsible, reducible into one. And yet, if you think about each of them, you would say, look, if someone is a cheater, they're not honest. That's a failure of honesty. Honesty prevents that. If someone is hypocritical, that's not honest. Honesty prevents that. And so they all pertain to honesty. So it's a quite broad in scope. It covers a lot of moral territory in that respect. But that's just outwardly. I would expect an honest person to tell the truth, not cheat, not steal, da 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 da. Inwardly, though, it matters, and this is where philosophers maybe add another element or a layer beyond what people ordinarily talk about with respect to honesty. Because going all the way back to Plato and Aristotle, it's been common to think that you have to have the right kind of motivation or the right kind of heart behind your behavior if you're going to count as virtuous, not just outwardly behave well. So to make that a little bit more concrete, you're talking to the boss asks you a question, you tell the truth to the boss, you've done an honest thing. Behavior gets a check mark, it's good. But why did you do it? What motivated you to tell the truth? And there are some answers I think would be acceptable for the virtue and some which would not be. If you answered, well, because I'm angling for the boss's job, or I want to get promoted, or I don't want to get fired, or I don't want to feel guilty for telling a lie, or I want to get rewards in the afterlife, or I was just, bored and I couldn't think of anything else to do than tell the truth. For entertainment, I guess. These are all self-serving, self-interested, egoistic, all about me kind of reasons. That's where my heart is. And that's not going to cut it for the virtue of honesty, and at least the way I'm thinking of it. Heck, it is better that you're acting honestly than not. So I don't want to be too harsh here. It's, very glad you're acting honestly, but it's not enough to get you all the way to being a virtuously honest person instead. And I'll end with this, and we can talk about truth if you like after that. Instead, it has to be something that is looking outward beyond myself. I have to be concerned with something bigger than me, whether it's I'm telling the truth because it's my duty, or morality requires of it, or it's the right thing to do, or it's what an honest person would do, or maybe it's because more altruistically I care about this person, or they're my friend, or I respect them, I don't want to harm them or hurt them. Whatever those reasons, they're all bigger than me. They can't get to count. That's virtuous motivation. For honesty, we got the motivation, we got the behavior, we got a package deal now that's much more in the space of honesty.
And then that issue of truth, because truth means different things. I mean, there's objective truth, but
Right.
there's also someone may have a personal truth with regards to their own personal values. So
For
there's
sure.
different meanings to truth.
Yep, yep, yep. And it hooks up in interesting ways with honesty, and it's surprising ways because there's one way of thinking where I think, it's natural to say honesty must be a matter of objective truth. Like, the honest person is only reporting the objective truth. They're really plugged into reality. They're plugged into the way things really are. And that's what they're reporting if they're fully honest. And I want to say, no, that's not actually the correct conception of honesty. I mean, it would be nice if that happens. I'm a big fan of objective truth. I think it exists. I want us to get to the objective truth. But you don't have to get to the objective truth to be an honest person. Instead, honesty tracks subjective truth. It tracks how you perceive reality, not necessarily how reality actually is. Let me give you a couple examples to make it a little more concrete. I know that's pretty abstract. So here's one I like to use as a starter example, and then I'll give a couple more elaborate ones. Starter example is 3,000 years ago, people were talking about the shape of the Earth, and they said the Earth is flat. What's your intuition? I mean, honest? Yeah, honest, right? Even though they're saying something false, and the Earth is not flat. So they're not tracking reality, and yet that is no flaw of their honesty. So you can say something that's false and be honest. You can also say something that's true and be dishonest. So 3,000 years ago, if they were, one of them was trying to cause some trouble and fool other people or something like that and said, oh yeah, everyone knows the Earth is round, they would have been lying. Even though they said something true. So that's the starter example. We can get more elaborate ones. I don't have to get into them, but I mean, here's one briefly. In the Matrix. So if listeners have seen the Matrix, people in the Matrix can still be honest, even though the vast majority of their beliefs are false. Almost everything they believe about reality is mistaken because they don't realize that they're in a computer-generated simulation or hologram, and yet, nevertheless, they can be honest. So that's how I think those things hook up.
Do you think it's important to talk a little bit about the different forms that dishonesty can take as well? Because I think people will always point out, well, it's when you lie, but it can also just be withholding information, right? Like if I think the example you use in the book is a wife says, "Where have you been?" And the husband says, "Oh, I was out with the guys at the bar." And
Right.
then, he leaves out the bit about, and then I went home with that girl I met at the
Yeah,
bar
yeah,
or the
yeah.
apartment.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, we briefly went through a kind of litany of them, like that misleading, that stealing, cheating, and so forth. But it's not always very clear what each of them means and how they're different. And I think we can easily run them together. I mean, some of them I think are pretty clear, like cheating is different than stealing, and that's different from lying. So those I think are pretty straightforward. But there are a couple that are more maybe under the radar, or we don't distinguish them very clearly in our thinking. I'll mention misleading, which is the one you mentioned too, and then I'll mention BSing also. So misleading, that's when, unlike lying, you actually say something which you think is true, but you qualify it or you say it in such a way with the hope that someone will draw a false implication from it. So you're trying to get someone to draw a false conclusion from your true statements. Your example, which was one in the book, honey, where were you last night? And you say, I was at the bar with the guys. That is true. But you're intentionally leaving off one word, which is only, and you're hoping that she draws the conclusion that you were only at the bar. You never said that. You only said you were at the bar, which is true, but you're hoping she draws the conclusion that you're only at the bar so that you don't have to get into further questions about where else you were. So that is a real phenomena. It's called misleading as opposed to lying. It is different, and it's dishonest. The other one I thought I'd mention, it's got a cool name. I don't know if I need to, just stick with the BSing version of it. Sometimes if I talk about it, I get beeped out, bleeped out or whatever because of that.
Yeah, I got to be careful with the YouTube algorithms.
So I'll stick with BS. Is also importantly different because when you're doing that, you are not lying or telling the truth intentionally. You don't care. You're just fabricating or making something up. You don't care whether it's true or false, so long as that serves your purposes. The example I give is someone in a store and a customer comes in and says, what's the weather forecast going to be like? Should I buy an umbrella? And the store clerk has no idea what the forecast is like. And so they're not lying and they're not misleading or anything like that. They just they say, oh, yeah, you better buy an umbrella. It's going to rain soon. They just make it up because it helps them get a sale. That's BSing, and that's also dishonest. So many different forms of dishonesty.
So what's really interesting is that early on in the book, you have a whole chapter, why the news is not all bad. And it's interesting because your book is titled The Honesty Crisis, but you're not purely pessimistic. You sort of argue and look at the research saying that in fact there's sort of a truth default.
Right.
The truth default theory, and most people aren't necessarily like huge liars, and it's a small minority. So can you explain maybe I don't know what the word for it is, but I think people will find a disconnect there maybe because they'll
Yeah,
be
yeah, yeah.
saying, well, honesty crisis, but then you're
Yeah,
saying those people are not liars.
yeah. Good, good, very good. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, part of it was just autobiographical. I didn't want to write a book with just a lot of bad news in it. I mean, I didn't want readers to have to go through that experience. So I wanted, but it was also honest to the data in accurately presenting the point that it's not all bad news. And so I wanted to at least give a kind of a mixed picture here, and kind of prepare readers before they get to the bad news with some good news. Okay, boost them up a little bit, and then hit them with the crises. So in so doing, I focus on two things: lying frequency in ordinary conversation, and then dishonesty on social media. Um, I don't think that ends up being in tension with the chapters to come because the chapters to come focus on other areas of honesty and dishonesty. So they don't speak to these two areas that I'm going to speak to in a moment. So that the overall picture then becomes a bit of a mixed bag. Some areas we're doing pretty well, some areas we're not doing so well today. But the ones that I focus on in this chapter, first of all, in ordinary conversation. Now, notice it's just lying, like we've just, very, very helpful to clarify there are different forms of dishonesty. So I'm not talking about most of the other forms, just lying. How often do people lie in their ordinary lives? And the empirical research comes into play here. I can no longer be a philosopher. I have to actually get some data and step outside of my field and go into things like psychology. Earlier research suggested it was about 2 to 3 lies per day on average, which isn't great. And that, I thought it was supposed to be good news. But more recent research was more careful and individually focused, wondering whether everyone individually was doing 2 or 3 lies a day, or whether there might have been a small group of frequent liars who were skewing the average. And it turned out it was that second. So in the study I like to highlight by Serrato and colleagues, 1,000 people were surveyed. 60% said they'd not told a single lie in the last 24 hours. So the majority, no lies. Of the remaining 40%, most of them told very, very few lies in the last 24 hours. And it was only a 5% group that was the frequent liars. They are the ones who inflate the average because of their high number of lies. And then this has been replicated and tracking people not just 24 hours, but over the course of 3 months, every day, see how their pattern of lying unfolds. And we get an interesting picture there, leading to truth default theory, which you reference, which is the most supported theory in communication today.
That's what Timothy
Levine.
Levine. Okay.
Yep. Somebody should, if you haven't had him on, somebody should definitely have on your show. He's a super sharp, probably the best empirical researcher on lying in the world today. Very, very good. Yeah, so not my theory, I should say. And then fitting on that topic of honesty, I can't claim credit for it. I'm not claiming credit for it. I'm just using his research, which says most people are in a truth default mindset, which means that they default to telling the truth naturally. And if they lie, that takes effort and cognitive resources to get them to lie. It didn't have to be this way. It could have been that we were neutral between truth and lying, or we defaulted into lying. But his, I think, very convincing case is that we are naturally truth tellers, and we're also truth biased in expecting others to be true tellers. And so that is how we were evolutionarily designed, or whatever the story is, to be today. And that to me is a positive. That's some good news. I can say real briefly, much more briefly, about the social media. Well, in the remainder of the chapter, when we look at research on Facebook, internet dating sites, text messages, emails, even LinkedIn resumes, a number of studies suggest that there's no more dishonesty here than in ordinary life, contrary to what you might have expected. That doesn't apply to all of the internet. We'll probably get into other areas of the internet where it's not so rosy. But in these, what do they have in common? Your name is attached to it. There's a paper trail. There's a recording of some kind. And in those kind of situations, people are not very tempted or motivated to be dishonest, perhaps understandably.
Another area I want to get into is the sort of how the honesty crises are arising with all of this new technology, particularly with AI and deep fakes, is
Sure,
that seems pretty key to the moment we're in right now.
sure. So actually, it's a thread that runs throughout all the honesty crises. If there's one thing that unites them, it's that they all have some kind of technological component, which I think is what sparked each crisis in its own way. Sometimes it was just the internet. Sometimes it was AI. Sometimes it's social media. So it depends on what crisis we're talking about, but they all have that technological component. And I'll come into deepfakes in a second. But I want to stress that I'm not a technology hater. I don't think technology is inherently evil or bad. I think it's neutral. Like they gives us capacities to do things for good or bad. And so we come to deepfakes. So these are audio and video technologically generated, but specifically AI generated outputs, which have been manipulated by the user in some way. So an example of a deepfake audio is that during the last election, during the primary, there was a Biden primary, deepfake audio telling voters not to go to the primary and vote for him. An example of a video is that at the start of the war, there was a Zelensky video saying, soldiers stand down, don't resist the Russians. In both cases, it was obviously manipulated by some kind of, at that point, cruder AI. Today, they are so powerful that it's very hard to determine whether it was authentic or fake. But the main form they take is pornographic. The vast majority of these deepfakes are AI non-consensual deepfake pornographic videos, although there are other forms they can take too. And I'm very worried about what the honesty implications are, and also how they're eroding trust in audio and video today.
And that's what I wanted to ask you next was what do you think the consequences are of
Yeah,
the sort of what are the consequences of the honesty crises?
yeah. Of this one in particular. So they don't have to necessarily be dishonest. I should flag that from the start. As long as there's a disclosure and some kind of clear messaging, this is a deepfake, this is manipulated, this is not authentic. That signals to the viewer, okay, I understand this about the content, and I should not treat it as real. I should not form a belief that this actually happened. But alas, that's not the norm. The norm is these things are put out there. They're shared on social media, whatever, with no disclosure. And as I said, they're so well done that lots of people are forming beliefs that they're authentic, that they're real. That, in the Biden case, that Biden was actually the one who recorded the robocall to tell people to not go to the primaries. So, what are some consequences of that? Maybe I'll just mention a couple. One is that clearly it's going to break down trust in audio and visual media. Because in the past, we were very trusting towards these. We saw a video, we just take it for granted typically that that's what actually happened. Now we're not at the point where we should default into thinking it's fake. It's rather that we're getting to the point where we default into skepticism. We just don't know. It might be fake. It might be real. I don't know. How am I supposed to tell? I have to suspend judgment. That's a consequence.
I was going to say it reminds me of, whenever I'm reading now online, whenever I read an article or even a Facebook post, I'll constantly think to myself, am I reading something that's written by a person or is this AI?
Yeah, for sure. Yep. No. See, it's already filtering into your consciousness. That's sad. That's sad that we lose that trust that we used to have with the author or the source. Two other consequences I'll mention quickly that are negative, probably even worse. One is it's violating the autonomy of people who are put in these videos without their consent. Think in particular about the pornographic ones. They typically involve female actresses like Scarlett Johansson or Taylor Swift or whatnot, who are inserted into the video, and you can use your imagination what happens next. Well, they didn't consent to that. That's violating their autonomy. That's a terrible thing. Any moral philosopher would say, I think. And then the third one, and it's not exhaustive, but a third terrible consequence is that they're causing real harm to real people. So, trends these days is to make deepfake naked videos of classmates in high school. For example, high school boys making these videos of their female classmates and then spreading them around the high school and shaming the girl in the process. Of course, she was not involved at all, but you can't get the image out of your mind once you see it, kind of phenomena. And, even to the point of leading to suicides because of the terrible social stigma and costs attached to that kind of thing. So real harm is at issue here.
Do you want to talk about the ways in which there may be ways in which dishonesty is being incentivized? So the example I think of immediately is you may have students that realize, well, I want to be more efficient.
Yeah.
So I'm going to use AI to help me with my papers.
Sure.
And they may lie about it. Do you think there's incentive structures that may lead to these honesty crises?
Yeah. I mean, in general, yes, but it's probably easier to unpack it with a particular example. So let me just piggyback on your example. So switching over to the educational context, I mean, AI again is neutral. Students don't have to use it at all, but think about the incentives in their minds to using it. So in the past, if they wanted to cheat on a paper, in the distant past, maybe they would get like a friend to help them or a paper mill or something like that they could hire. The internet comes along. Okay, now they have some more resources at their disposal. They could go online and kind of Google some material and maybe cut and paste it into their paper. That makes things a little bit easier for them until, of course, they get caught, and then it's not so easy. But then AI comes along and it makes their life so easy, so they think. Because even when you went online, you had to search, you had to find, you had to weave it in and incorporate it so it didn't look clunky. And then you had that risk that the professor would come back after you and find the material. With AI, you give the assignment to AI. Maybe you tell what kind of level of writing it's supposed to be, the length, the topic, maybe some of the readings. And within a span of 10 seconds, it's going to spit out a perfectly well-written essay for you that maybe you have to tweak a little bit more, but you can be done in half an hour, turn in a paper that probably will get a better grade than what you would have written in the first place. And the threat of detection is very low. You might have suspicion on the part of the professor, but the professor is rarely going to be able to prove it. And so there's almost certainly not going to be any punitive consequences. So with that kind of setup, uh, you can make the case all you want, as a professor, the goals of education and what we here for learning and improving your mind and critical reasoning and all these kind of things. But there's this tempting new flashy toy, you may even call it, that will cut your workload way down, and also another incentive, probably get you a better grade, um, and free you up to do other things, probably not academic. Um, Boy, hard to resist. It can be resisted, but it's hard to resist. And so, yeah, that's some of the incentive structure built into it.
On the sort of broader, sort of maybe macro level, I guess what scares me about the sort of crises of honesty and the proliferation of dishonesty in various areas of our lives is that I get scared that it's fraying the social fabric,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that has consequences that most of us don't even think about, right? Like, if there's widespread dishonesty, it can dull our capacity to empathize with others. Because we think, well, that person could just be a liar or a cheat. We start becoming isolated. Our communities get fragmented. I hope I don't sound like paranoid or
No,
dystopian
no, no,
about it,
no.
but
You sound
there
like
is
me.
like this
Yeah,
fraying of the
yeah, yeah,
social fabric that
yeah,
happens because of it.
yeah. So in the last chapter, so I echo some of the same sentiments. So I'm with you. You know, I step back myself and I wonder, bigger picture, why should we care about honesty, and why should we care if it's eroding? And I have the same fear as you do. So um, yeah, at the societal level, I mean, we could there are different ways to frame it. Like, why should I care about being an honest person myself individually? But just stick with the societal level first. Think about and trying to visualize what a dishonest society would look like. Well, several bad things I think we don't want should jump to our mind. One is, yeah, hard to empathize with others. Two, trust is going to break down. How can I trust people if I fear, if concerned they're going to steal from me, cheat me, lie to me, and so forth? Three, relationships are going to erode. Relationships are going to become much more instrumentalized. It's just about how can I use this other person for my own benefits rather than having genuine friendships and genuine, loving relationships, which are based on care and concern for the other person. That's not going to be present if there's rampant dishonesty. And then finally, I mean, all this kind of feeds into just fear. It's a society of dishonesty is going to be a society of fear. I'm going to live in fear. Other people are going to live in fear because we can't, proverbially sleep at night without worrying that other people are going to take advantage of us, lie, cheat, steal, and the like. It's hard to rest at night with those kind of worries in our minds. So yeah. I mean, this matters. It's not just some kind of academic game I'm playing or we're playing. If honesty erodes, we're going to see the consequences.
So I want to spend a little bit more time on well, I want to play devil's advocate a bit
Sure.
because I when I was younger I used to think much more black and white about honesty.
Uh-huh.
Um and then it's odd what happened is I got to know and work with kids and people with I guess neurodevelopmental disorders like Williams syndrome or I guess autism is more well known. But
Yep.
in both Williams syndrome and autism, there's often a tendency to be very honest, right? The people with and they can be too honest. I know that
Sure.
people with Williams syndrome, they can be so honest that they can get taken advantage of because they can't read the cues of
Oh,
someone
wow.
that's trying to deceive them.
Okay.
So, are there times when someone can be too honest or that there's an excess of it?
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Um, it's a nice reminder and corrective because we can sing the praises of honesty. We can talk about the evils of dishonesty, and then we can get too carried away with that to where actually we shade, over from dishonesty, shade too far in the opposite direction. This is what Aristotle taught us thousands of years ago. For every virtue, there are two vices attached to it. a vice of deficiency and a vice of excess. And for honesty, we naturally spend most of our time talking about dishonesty, and we neglect the possibility that there can be excessive honesty. So what does that mean? Well, I think if you're virtuously honest, you're going to say, let's just stick with telling the truth because that's the easy one to start with. You're going to, if you're virtuously honest, you're going to tell the truth, but you're going to tell it to the right person at the right time, in the right way, to the right extent. There is such a thing as oversharing. There is such a thing as lack of tact and discernment, but that's not virtue of honesty anymore. Now we've gone into the excess vice space. And so a real concrete illustration of this, I use this example. You're riding on the elevator, and I think we've all been there. Like you're going up this long elevator ride with a stranger you've never met before, or maybe like a superficial colleague, like you don't really know the person, and you just don't want to sit there and like have this awkward silence. So you start up a little conversation, and suddenly the other person starts sharing all kinds of stuff. Like they share their bathroom habits for the day, or they share their like bank account numbers and all this thing. It's like, whoa, I recognize you're telling me the truth, so yeah, I can't really fault you for your honesty. I mean, you're not lying to me, but this is just inappropriate, too honest, oversharing, lack of tact, lack of discernment. That's a failure of the virtue here. So yeah, we should be are mindful of that, on guard for it. Although I have to say, compared to dishonesty, I'll take that any day over dishonesty.
I also know that you address this one too, this sort of devil's advocate question, which is, what if you're lying to spare someone's failings?
Yes.
So, sometimes if you tell the raw truth about how you feel about someone, you could just cause great emotional pain or harm in that sense.
Yeah.
So how would you respond to someone that would say, well, maybe there's sometimes you should be lying a little bit?
Yeah. Good. Yeah. So this is this balancing act we've got going here. So sometimes, I mean, if I'm always advocating honesty, that might seem problematic too, because are there situations in which it's okay, or maybe even recommended that you be dishonest? So I think let's take these into two buckets or two kinds of cases: white lies and then innocent victims. So let me say a bit about white lies, and if you want, we can circle back to innocent victims and saving innocent lives. White lies are like probably the place people go to first in saying, well, can I lie sometimes? And I bet most people in their daily life do this from time to time. We're all familiar with it, right? I've done it. I have to be honest. I've probably done it in the last couple of days. Questions like, how did the dessert taste, or how does the outfit look on me, or how did you like my new book, The Honesty Crisis? I probably get people telling me white lies about that, and I mean, often the intention is good, the heart's in the right place. If you lie in your response because you didn't actually like the dessert, or you think the outfit doesn't look good, or you didn't like the Honesty Crisis book, but you want to spare the feelings of the other person. So maybe it's like a kind of form of compassion or non-malevolence or something like that, where you're trying to protect the other person's feelings by giving them a lie rather than the truth. Okay, so I don't want to fault the person too much, but I tend to be a little bit down on white lying. I would at least recommend caution. I wouldn't say it's always wrong, but I would really recommend caution in most cases. There's more to it than we initially think. So to take an example, the dessert. I eat the dessert. My wife asked me what I think, and secretly I didn't like it very much at all. But I tell her I thought it was great. Thank you for making it. Now, this is not a true story, so I'm not going to get in trouble if she listens to this later. But I probably, we could construct true stories around my own personal life. Well, what's the big deal? Who cares? So what? You're smoothing over the relationship. Your marriage is going to go better. Well, keep in mind a couple things. First of all, does it dispose you to tell more lies in the future? Maybe greases the wheels for future lying. You have to keep track of the fact that you told the lie. Because the next time she makes the same dessert and you suddenly say something different, she's like, well, wait a minute, I made this for you before and you liked it. What's the difference? You have to make sure third parties don't find out about it. My kids, for example, they found out I didn't really like it, and they rat me out to my wife. There goes all that. Um, you know, if she finds out later through somehow, she might then maybe a breach of trust. Like, I asked you for your opinion. You didn't give it to me. How can I trust you in other contexts to give me your honest opinion? I don't know if I can trust you anymore. So there are all these reasons why it's more messy and could potentially be a bad idea. So again, I'm not saying it's always wrong. I just recommend caution in a lot of cases. And I'll stop there. Yeah.
I just want to be honest. That was the hardest sell for me in the book so far, which was
Yeah.
because I've always thought, well, a white lie is a white lie, and sometimes it doesn't hurt anyone. So I guess that I like that was the hardest sell for me. What
Yeah.
would you
Yeah. Yeah.
say to someone that like it is a hard sell for them, the idea that white lying can also lead down a dangerous path?
Yeah. 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 No, that's fair. And I appreciate that. I think your reaction is representative of most people's reaction. But now to feed into, now just got, I think, to be on your side for the moment. Are there cases where, morally speaking, it is okay to lie? White lies might be controversial in my view, but I think there are other cases where it's pretty clear cut. The answer is yes. And the one I use here is certainly not original to me. Many philosophers have talked about it. It actually goes all the way back to Immanuel Kant, who had an example of an axe murderer who was looking for an innocent person to kill, and you knew where the innocent person was, and would you tell the axe murderer the location or not? The updated version of it in the 20th century is the Nazi at the door version of it. I'm guessing listeners are familiar, but just to go through it real quickly, you're hiding a Jewish family in your basement during World War II in a Nazi-occupied village. You're the homeowner. The Nazis are doing a routine patrol of the neighborhood. They knock on your door. They say, do you know where any Jews are? You know that if you say, no, I don't know, they'll just go to the next house. They're not going to be suspicious. They're just doing a routine patrol. But of course, if you tell them, yes, there are Jews in the basement, they're going to come in, grab that family, probably grab you too, and there'll be a lot of loss of life. This kind of case has its kind of overwhelming verdict, but not unanimous verdict. So Augustine, Aquinas, and Kant all would have lined up and said, you have to be honest to the Nazi. However, myself and the vast majority of people today go the other way, and they say it's perfectly morally permissible to lie to the Nazi. Indeed, many people would say, and I probably would say this too, that's morally obligatory, like you're morally required. You do something wrong if you didn't lie to the Nazi to protect the innocent lives. So what we have here is a trade-off between honesty and some other virtue like compassion towards the family, honesty towards the Nazi. We trade those off because they're in conflict with each other, and yet the trade-off goes in the favor of compassion. It doesn't go in the favor of honesty, and so it becomes morally obligatory to be dishonest. And that's my conclusion there.
I also wanted to ask you, I know you mentioned it a few times, but the sort of dangerous path or issues with moral relativism. And I wouldn't call myself a moral relativist, but I can be relativistic when it comes to like cultural mores. Like different cultures have different ways of interpreting the world or values. But I think moral relativism, I'm not a philosopher, so I want to clarify, maybe something a little bit different than that.
Yeah. Good. So this is something I don't dwell on a huge amount in the book, but I've written quite a bit in other contexts. I mean, my dissertation was actually surrounding issues of whether morality is objective or not. And so it's certainly a topic very near and dear to my heart. Just to clarify for listeners who may be not familiar with that terminology, moral relativism roughly is the idea that morality is a human invention. It's a human product. So we're the source of moral standards of right and wrong and good and bad. That could either be each individual. So I have my moral code, you have your moral code, but there's no higher moral code to tell us who's right and wrong. It could also take a cultural form. There could be cultural moral relativism, so that maybe there's like Nazi morality and American morality, or however you divide up cultures. And so Nazis have their moral code. We have our moral code. They're conflicting, but there's no higher source or objective standard to say which is right and wrong. The opposing view is moral objectivism, which, as that suggests, says there is a higher standard, a moral code that governs all human beings and puts in place standards of appropriate and inappropriate behavior for human beings. And that morality can come from God or a divine source, or it may just, if you're an atheist or an agnostic, it could just exist on its own with no higher source. It just is a feature of reality. I think you could buy a lot of what I say about honesty either way. You could be a relativist or an objectivist. However, it seems to me that it fits better with an objective framework. So, and furthermore, an objective framework, I think, is just very plausible in its own right. It's just, there's lots of reasons to buy the objective framework, to go that way. And relativism has many costs and many problems associated with it. So maybe I'll end by tying the relativism to the honesty and the Nazi at the door. Suppose you're an objectivist about the Nazi at the door scenario. Then you think there is one right answer as to what the homeowner should do in communicating to the Nazi. So it's not a matter of opinion. There's one right thing that the homeowner should do. And furthermore, I mean, I think there's good reason to think it's lie to the Nazi. If you're a relativist, it's all a matter of opinion. So if one person has the opinion that it's okay to lie to the Nazi, that's fine for that person. If another person has the opinion that you have to tell the truth to the Nazi, that's fine for that person. And neither of them is any more or less correct. That doesn't seem right to me. It seems to me pretty clear there's a better answer and a worse answer. And then we play on the example a little bit more, and we think, what about what the Nazis themselves are doing as Nazis? In their minds, it's perfectly legitimate, killing 7 million Jews or whatever, 6 million Jews. That's perfectly legitimate. That's their opinion. We have the opinion of what they're doing is horrific. If you're a relativist, those opinions are equally valid. And boy, I don't want to go there. I don't want to say that. I don't want to say that the Nazi opinion about how to treat Jews is equally valid to my opinion. So I think there's good case to be made for a higher standard of morality.
On that thread, if you don't mind me going here,
Yeah.
do you think your views are compatible with, or could they be compatible with, like, someone that has a sort of social constructivist view of the world? I hope that's not a left field question.
No. Say a little bit more about. I have an answer to that, but I just want to make sure what I mean by that is the same thing you mean. What do you tell me a little bit more about social constructivist?
That our idea of knowledge, meaning, and just reality is constructed through culture and language.
Yeah. So it depends on how we work out the details of that position. There's a version of that position which makes it sound just like relativism across the board. So it's not just morality that's constructed by human beings. Everything is constructed by human beings. So truth is constructed, and perception is constructed, and
there's hard and soft versions.
Yeah, of this. So if we go with that, then there's no one's going to be a moral objectivist as well. I mean, if you're holding that kind of hard version, then you're just going to be kind of relativist across the board, including morality. You're just going to say morality is socially constructed as well. There is a softer version, of those ideas, which say that, our perceptions of things are shaped or influenced by our society, or our upbringing or the culture that we inhabit. So, because I inhabit this kind of culture, I'm shaped in certain ways and leads me probably to have certain beliefs and do certain things, as opposed to if I was living in a different culture. Now that is, I think, a very reasonable position, almost uncontroversial position, very kind of tame view, and is completely compatible with both a moral objectivist position about morality and just frankly an objectivist position about everything, like objectivist position about truth, objectivist position about the external world, objectivist position about beauty. So it really does uh, bear fruit to pause and work out the details of what the exact claim is to see what we're buying into with social construction, and then we can see what the implications are.
Before we close out, did you want to talk a little bit about the chapter on politics and fake news? Because it's interesting. I noticed throughout that chapter, you sort of point out that having a belief that is, not true doesn't necessarily mean you're automatically a dishonest person. But it's interesting because this is all leading to a big problem, right? Like
Yeah,
we,
yeah,
we live in an age of political polarization, but it's not all just simply, oh, the person that disagrees with me is dishonest. It's there's
very
layers
good.
to this onion.
Yeah, 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 very good, very good. Yep, yep. And I'm happy to expand as much as you like. That's one of the big takeaways of that chapter. Before we the preliminary takeaway of that chapter. So later in the chapter, I highlight the honesty crisis that I see it, but I first recommend caution of just immediately imputing to the other side, given our polarized, world these days, immediately imputing to the other side dishonesty or dishonest motives. Sometimes that is apt and deserved, but we need to know more about the particular person or group of people to get the right kind of context. So, what do I mean? Well, take your favorite example, election denial, vaccine skepticism, whatever, climate denial, whatever it might be. I'm not going to take a stand one way or the other. I'll only note that for some people, when they adopt the position they do, it may not be for dishonest reasons. Maybe let's take election denial. So someone thinks that the election was rigged. I'm not saying what election, but you can fill in the blank. Recent examples of this discussion. They say the election was rigged. Why do they say that? Well, because the media that they hear and the leaders that they trust told them that the election was rigged. And they haven't heard much counter evidence to that. So their sources of information on political matters are telling them this. They trust those sources and they adopt that belief. I don't think that's and furthermore, then they turn around and share that belief with their friends and others. I don't think that's necessarily dishonest. There may be some flaws there. Maybe they should have been more critical. Maybe they should have been more open-minded. Maybe they should have, checked their sources better. Sure, we can have that kind of discussion. But look, at the end of the day, we have to trust other people for information. We are not experts on everything ourselves. And so we trust certain people to give us information which we hope is true. And in doing so, we might be misled or get false beliefs, but that doesn't automatically make us dishonest. On the other hand, if the person formed these beliefs because they wanted them to be true, evidence to the contrary, that's dishonest. So if they were getting lots of evidence that the election wasn't rigged, but they just ignored it because they really wanted it to turn out that way because they were so disappointed that their preferred candidate didn't win. Well, yeah, okay, you're intentionally distorting the facts. You're intentionally ignoring the evidence. That's a failure of intellectual honesty, and that's no good in my book. So that's the kind of preliminary stuff where I recommend caution before jumping to accusations of honesty. And then, if there's time, I can get a little bit into where I think the real honesty crisis lies.
Well, let's dig into that then.
So I kind of pivot into another space that we're all talking about these days: fake news, political misinformation, and tie it again into technology, because after all, fake news has been around long before it was even a label. But there's this bump or increase in the sharing of fake news. How so? Well, we have new tools available to us that facilitate that sharing. One in particular, well, social media is what I focus on here. And the story goes like this. It turns out that while people do care about accuracy to some extent, accuracy in what they read, accuracy in what they share. When they get into a kind of social media mindset, they somehow change their priorities and other things take greater importance to them. So let me give a concrete illustration. I'll actually give you an example from empirical research. This is not me talking. This is interesting empirical research on this phenomena. So from a study in 2021 by Penny Cook and colleagues, one of the top researchers in this area, he gave participants this headline: over 500 migrant caravanners arrested with suicide vests. So let me read again. Over 500 migrant caravanners arrested with suicide vests. And so that was a headline presented to participants in a study. The participants were supposed to rate the accuracy of that, and then would they consider sharing it? And now let me report for Republicans. This was rated as accurate by 15%. So, credit to them in that most of them recognized this was very dubious, unlikely to be accurate. But 51% of Republicans said they would consider sharing it. So again, I think the numbers they're so striking. 15% thought it was accurate, but 51% said they would consider sharing it. And this applies in other versions to Democrats too. It's not a completely Republican phenomena. But this now feels, I think, an honesty crisis, or at least that's how I'm thinking of it, where on social media, even if we recognize something as perhaps of dubious accuracy, many people are willing to share it nonetheless without a disclaimer or without any kind of, flagging it as misinformation or fake news, and thereby getting it out there to a larger audience, some of which will take it to be real, and thereby, form mistaken opinions. That's alarming.
If there were one thing you wanted my listeners to get out of the conversation we've been having, what would it be? What's the biggest takeaway?
I don't know if I can give you one.
You can give me multiple ones if you want.
Okay, yeah, so I don't know if I can nail down to one. How about three briefly? One is a greater understanding of the complexity and nuance of honesty. It's more subtle and rich than you might have thought. Two, honesty really matters. It's really important, and when it's eroding, that's really important too, and we need to pay attention to that. We should care about that. And then three, there are areas of society where it is eroding today, some of which we're probably familiar with, maybe like the education and AI one, others which we're less familiar with, and we need to pay more attention to. Greater awareness of where honesty is under pressure today, and call to action to do something about it, and some practical strategies to also push back and try to preserve our most treasured virtue, is what I say. So
Can I ask you one more thing? And I guess it ties into what we were talking about earlier. And it has less to do solely with the book, but more with morality in general.
Sure.
I understand and agree with you that moral relativism leads down a bad path, but I guess I also have this, and maybe it's paranoid, but sometimes I get scared of people that are too absolutist.
Oh yeah.
In the way they talk about morality, and maybe there's a difference between moral objectivism and moral absolutism, but I'm very scared of zealots, people that are no, this is unconditionally right or wrong. There is no gray area. And how do you deal with that kind of issue as a philosopher?
Yeah. There are two aspects of that. So there's this question. So we're going to adopt an objective framework. So we're going to assume that there's one objective morality for all human beings. One concern is that objective morality is without exception. It's just kind of a set of simple rules that don't have any exceptions to them. We've actually touched on that. For example, maybe part of that objective morality is do not lie. No exception. Not even if the Nazi at the door. And that's very concerning to me, because I think that's very problematic. How could it be? I couldn't go along with that. one thing to note about that is you don't have to buy that picture to believe in objective morality. You can believe in objective morality and think that objective morality is quite complex, quite nuanced, with multiple exceptions. So you could say, for example, that the objective morality includes a prohibition against lying, except in XYZ circumstances. And that could still be an objective morality framework. It's not a matter of opinion. That's the way it is. That's the standard that's in place. It's just a much more sophisticated standard. Now, here's another worry that's in the neighborhood of what you're concerned about. So that's one thing. I think we can, let's call that absolutism, that like exceptionalist simple rule view. We can put that to the side. You're not committed to that at all. Here's another worry. It's kind of an intolerance worry, which is to say you believe in objective morality and you think you've got that objective morality figured out. And then suddenly you're very intolerant of other people's perspectives. And you kind of shut them down and say, look, that doesn't, it's not compatible with the objective morality, therefore you're wrong, and we should, censor your view, or, it doesn't deserve a hearing at the table because it's not in line with the objective morality. There too, I think there's a response that's pretty good, which is to say, it's one thing to believe in objective morality. It's another thing to believe that you've figured out what that objective morality says. That you mastered the objective morality, that you're the expert on the objective morality. I believe in objective truths in science, but I'm surely no expert about those truths. And I need to listen to other people to gain more knowledge of those truths in science. And even the best scientists today don't think they've got it all figured out. And they're willing to listen to other theories and run experiments and be open to counter evidence and proceed to develop a better understanding of scientific truths and scientific laws. Same thing in the moral case. Even if you believe in objective morality, you should not think that you're the expert on it, and you should be willing to entertain opposing views, listen to other arguments, and maybe even come to find out that you had a mistaken view, make a mistaken understanding of the objective morality, and learn from others and get a better understanding. That's how I hope that people would proceed who believe in objective morality.
Last thing, because I think this actually ties into the honesty crisis. Do you think there's times where, we make ourselves a self-appointed expert and we're willing to self-deceive ourselves and not listen to others? Do you think that's also part of the honesty crisis?
So self-deception as a general matter is dishonest. So right off the bat, that's one of the, we didn't touch on that very much earlier, but that's one kind of self-deception. I mean, that's one kind of dishonesty. When you deceive yourself, then you're telling yourself something false in order to maybe not confront a truth that you don't want to confront. That's going to have all kinds of bad consequences. And how could it lead to or foster subsequent honesty crises? I think the answer is yes. It actually hooks up to many of the particular ones I talked about. So people who engage in online infidelity will often self-deceive themselves into thinking it's not a big deal. Students who use the AI will often deceive themselves into thinking, well, maybe the professor didn't really mean for me to not use this, or maybe it wasn't actually prohibited. Sermon plagiarism, which we didn't even touch. It's all in the name of advancing the kingdom. God is going to approve it no matter what. Lots of these areas, you can trace bad honesty behavior back to self-deception. I think that's right.
I also know I said last question, but I
think you said that 3 times.
I know I'm bad. I'm being dishonest, or I don't.
No, that's not dishonesty. That's just curiosity.
I forgot to ask you earlier, and I just wanted to ask because I've been afraid to go down this rabbit hole of learning about it and the whole controversy and the scandal of it. What was writing the chapter on the Ashley Madison stuff like? Because that's just really depressing to me.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the chapters I have to say are depressing, but that might be the most one. So this is, for listeners who haven't looked at the book, this is a chapter on online infidelity. And so it's an honesty crisis because we have this new technology here, the technology internet, which provides opportunities to go and do things sexually that you could have done before, but it was a lot harder and it's now a lot easier this way. So it looks at three things: chat rooms, online chat rooms, Ashley Madison and infidelity websites, including OnlyFans, would be applicable there too. And then pornography is the biggest section. The Ashley Madison one you asked specifically about, I mean, so if someone's not familiar with that, that's a place where 70 million people apparently, according to one report, have used to try to arrange in-person encounters when the user is in a relationship already. So it's to facilitate infidelity for people already in relationships. And one, very depressing. One especially depressing thing about it is some of the empirical research done on users of it. For example, they report very high levels of sexual satisfaction afterwards if they've been able to, arrange an encounter. And they report very little guilt or dissatisfaction with having done it. So, that to me is quite discouraging when I'm trying to, try to push back against honesty crises when people are using this. And even afterwards, you might have hoped like guilt, remorse, shame. I wish I hadn't done this. Maybe I'll try and turn my life around. But as a matter of fact, it just seems like, hey, I did it and it was good. And I, but probably will look for occasions to do it again. So sorry. Very depressing chapter to write.
Well, I want to thank you again, Christian B. Miller, for coming on Parallax Views. Just let my listeners know how they can get a copy of the book and how they can follow your work.
Sure. All the usual places for the book, Amazon, but if you like independent booksellers, that they have it too.
We love the independent booksellers.
Good. And then find my work. My website is CB Miller, all one word, cbmiller.com, or on social media, although I give social media a hard time, I'm on there too. All the platforms, typically at Character Gap, one word, Character Gap, on X or Instagram or LinkedIn or all the usual places.
And I just wanted to note, because I should have mentioned it earlier, this book is written for a general audience. It's not just like a hyper academic one.
Correct. I'm on purpose. I've done the hyper academic ones. If people want more nitty gritty details, I can send them to those places. But this is for a general audience. Correct.
And thank you again, Christian Miller.
Thank you. Thanks for the conversation. Great questions, and enjoy being on your show.
A special thanks to my $10 and above tier supporters on Patreon, who make this show possible with their generous donations. Producers credits shout out to those supporters: Aaron, Fabian, Jeremy, Matt, Big Bob's Beepers, James, Enoch, David, Sadad, Tristan, Bob, Eva, Miriam, West Bank Robbery Pod, B. Lund, Transnatural Perspectives Podcast, Dan, Nick, Elliot, Fabian, Tom, Arlen, Bo, Spartacus, James, G, Jamie, Will, JC, WV, Sutra, Orc, Catherine, Aaron, Darko, Nathan, Holland, Dan, Mark, Chase, Olm, Gary, Nobody, Emilia, Nick, Brace, Michael, and Brian. Please join those listeners in supporting me at the $10 and above tier of my Patreon page, patreon.com/Parallax Views, if you'd like your very own producer's credit on each and every edition of the program. Until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. if we don't do it, others will be doing it like grace. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.